out, euphoria gets released into your brain and you feel happy, you feel calm. But I started working out regularly in quarantine and I have been doing it since the past year. But uh, recently, I worked out twice and I was upset. I was actually feeling very down and very lethargic, and I actually got sick the next day. I was my energy level was like zero. I didn't feel like talking to anyone. I was actually very cranky. So I wanted to ask, why did something like which made me feel happy before made me feel lethargic and suddenly? Like, what changed in the middle?
I don't know, your diet, your sleep cycle.
Yeah, so I did adhere to those things, but nothing unusual happened.
And you're
So
saying this happened twice, yes?
yeah, twice.
As a,
Not
again?
no, so like it happened before and then it happened again a month ago or like something like that.
So there is space between these events.
Yes.
And they're also not, they're the exception rather than the rule, correct? Right?
Yeah, but when I looked, like, when I assessed the exceptions, but I didn't have anything, nothing unusual happened. I was So is there something that your brain reacts to differently, like if there's nothing happening differently?
You mean that did something happen to your neurotransmitter communication just on those particular two cases, two events that you've mentioned, where you didn't actually experience how you usually do experience yourself to be feeling happier or more at ease if you've been experiencing greater anxiety or something like that before? That's your question, correct?
Yeah, so like why is there any explanation for this? Like why
Yeah.
could this have happened except if there wasn't an exception in the situation?
I think you have to consider the environmental context. And again, because you mentioned two separate instances that happened with some space between them, I don't know if you can clearly recall exactly, but I feel like, again, you may not have released the usual neurotransmitters either because you were already tired going in, or perhaps it was about your consumption of caffeine or something like that. Because I'm thinking now, I'm thinking out loud to you honestly, because I'm also considering this question in my mind. And to my mind, disruptions of this kind are usually related to disruptions of other kinds that have happened on the same day, right? And so that's why the first thing I told you was that did you sleep okay? Sorry. Did you sleep okay, or did you eat something different? Were you already in a depressed mood? That also makes a big difference, right? Because at the end of the day, there's only this much that your chemical messengers can do if you're already in a particular state of mind. So let's say if you're feeling overly anxious, and then you go, you work out, what's happening is that you've released all of that tension, all of that energy. So you will not experience a sort of like, yes, kind of a runner's high after that. So that's something I would offer. I know it's not a perfect explanation, and I guess I should do some more research and get back to you on this. But so far, this is what I can think of. Okay, there's like, I don't know, 15 things that people have written on the chat. So 1 second. Uh, all right. Okay. Okay. 1 second. All right. So, number one, I want to introduce Safa, and then I'm going to get to all these thousand questions. And then we're going to get back to our lecture. Okay. So, Safa, could you switch your camera on? I'm sorry, is it already on?
Yes, my camera is already on.
Okay, great. So, you guys, this is Safa, and Safa is TA for Safa with section 50239. Is that correct?
Yes, 50239.
And also, Safa is a senior and also a social science major. And Safa, you want to tell them a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so I'm in my final semester and I'm doing social sciences. My major is psychology. I'm currently doing my thesis. So my thesis is a very psychology centered thesis, and it's a lot focused on abuse and how people and society reacts to it. So it's a very sensitive topic which takes up a lot of my time. But so it's something I've been very angry about for a long time, and so that's why I chosen it for my thesis. Apart from that, I may seem very unapproachable, but I am very approachable. So you can come to me anytime. I'm always on campus, like at least 4 days a week. I'm on campus, main campus, never on city campus. So you can come to me anytime, and we can have a talk. We can have a formal talk. We can have an informal talk, whatever you want. And yeah, I'm here if you have any questions, any queries, anything to discuss.
Also, Safa, can you just clarify that you're on which campus all the time so they know?
I'm on the main campus, the Karachi University campus.
Okay. And are you going to be attending
So
our?
I live in Malir Kent, and I am currently doing a job at main campus since 2019. So which is why I'm on campus all the time.
Okay,
Because if I'm not in class, I'm at the office, but I am at the main office because I live in Malir Kent, and I come here. So like it's city campus is very far away from me.
got it. Okay, thank you, Safa. So, are you going to be coming to our city campus class? Because you did on Monday, but we didn't have that class. Sorry, I just want to clarify.
No, so I am unable to come to city campus because I have a class at main campus in the second slot.
Got it. So you're going to be joining
I
that
have
on.
a clinical psychology class in the second
That's
slot.
fine. So you're going to join us online only, and then if anybody wants to meet you in person, they can meet you on main campus. But of course, people should write to you just to check if you're free as well, right? That's important. So that, yeah. So write to
Exactly.
Safa.
And I have made a WhatsApp group as well, and I have circulated the link. I've circulated the link on IB All Classes and IB Active Class, and I have circulated it to you at to some of your batchmates. So if you're not already on the group, do join that group because that will be our primary mode of communication.
Anybody have any questions? No? Okay, great. Okay, so thank you, Safa. Thanks. You can just
Thank you, ma'am.
log on your phone. I'm recording on the computer, so it should be okay. I'll post today. All right. So you guys, Safa, when you don't have access to the course site yet, right?
No, ma'am, I don't, but I will go and talk to Faizan after my class of clinical psychology. So I
Okay.
will go to
I'm gonna call.
CED and talk to Faizan about it.
All right. All right. I will also call him. Okay. Now I'm gonna get to these questions. So many, so many. Maybe I should remove class participation. I'm just kidding. So okay. Rabies is, I'm not sure. I have not studied rabies, but I know hydrophobia is a symptom of it. So I'm sorry, I can't comment on this remark. Um, Second, another question when we talk about control suppression of emotions with the help of amygdala is problem mental processing. If you suppress emotion too often, can you permanently modify your mental processing of emotion? That's a huge question. Um, and I want you to hold on to it when we start talking about emotion, which is like a full topic. So please hold on to it. I promise this question will get answered. I just don't have time right now to get into it. And then there was one question I missed out, which somebody had asked. Sana had asked, do drugs like Prozac permanently change a brain serotonin uptake, or is it until the period that you consume it? This is very relevant to our conversation about neurotransmitters and altered states of consciousness, okay, which are introduced by the consumption of chemical drugs that will alter the balance of neurotransmitters in your brain. And you need those chemical drugs when the balance of neurotransmitters in your brain is off, which is what happens when you experience a severely depressed state, which we've talked about, where you don't produce and keep enough serotonin in your brain for long enough for you to feel energized, to feel, well, what we call happy. But I'm not just saying happy, I mean basically at least to feel homeostasis emotionally. um, and so, in relation to your question, when you start taking a drug like Prozac, any antidepressant actually takes about 2 to 3 weeks to fully start working, because initially your brain takes some time to get used to this new, artificial substance that has been introduced into it. But once you do get used to it, and this is really, really important, this is why it is a very, you should be very cautious when you are prescribed antidepressants. Firstly, because psychologists here tend to give them out like candy, as well as doctors. And the problem is that if you only take Prozac, right, for your depression, but you do not have any other treatment, so you have no other therapy involved, what's happening is the only thing getting fixed is the chemical imbalance in your mind. But altering that chemical imbalance alone is not sufficient to correct, or to help you deal with whatever trauma or whatever negative thoughts, uh, and or actually are contributing to your depressed mood, right? So it's kind of like you're addressing the symptom if you just take antidepressants, but you're not addressing the roots of that condition, right? Or And I want to be very clear, when I say roots of that condition, I am talking about uh, environmental factors, as well as how those environmental factors have acted on the genetic factors present, right? That placed you perhaps at a higher risk for depression. And so, in line with that, when that all is happening, imagine that you suddenly stop taking the Prozac. It's not good for you at all, because you then have severe withdrawal symptoms. You're giving your brain something, the brain gets used to it. And when you suddenly shut it down, your brain kind of malfunctions a little bit. And that's why when you're taking antidepressants, you have to wean yourself off them. So you slowly decrease the amount you're taking. And that's the right way to do it, because as you cut down on your dosage of any medication of this kind that works on your brain, you slowly allow your brain to get used to the absence of that artificial substance that you're introducing. And so, yes, Prozac will last a little bit beyond your end of consumption, and then the effects will stop. Okay. Uh, Make the last stronger, Safa, right? So, the trauma like PTSD, yes, it absolutely can alter brain structures. That's what we've been saying all along, that the environment acts on your brain. Safa, can you answer these questions? And she has already. Right. I'm gonna sneeze and then we're gonna move on. Okay. Okay. Yes. Brain. I'm gonna give you a moment. Just read the slide, please. Okay. Thank you. I also hope I get fully well soon. So remember that we talked about the cerebral cortex. Wait, sorry. Laiba, you had raised your hand, and I missed it. Um,
Yeah, Miss, you have already answered my question. Basically, I was asking about the effects of antidepressant Prozac, but you answered that already.
okay, thank you. So now let's talk a little bit about this really powerful piece of your brain. It's called the cerebral cortex. Okay. Within the cerebral cortex, you have these key parts. And remember, I'm going to keep saying this, but things are happening in different parts of your brain that are the actual soul, or let's say core functions of those parts of the brain. But things are also happening in those parts of the brain that are related to whatever's happening in other parts of the brain, and more all of the time. All of these processes are happening simultaneously, and that's why we call it parallel processing, which is one of the most amazing things about the human brain. um, so the parallel processing, right? It kind of, let's look at what it looks like. So within your cerebral cortex, you have these key pieces. You've got the frontal lobes. The frontal lobes are responsible for your rationality, for your decision making, for your problem solving, right? It's like the part of you that is responsible for judging and weighing, right? It's your rational piece. Um, then you've got the parietal lobes. The parietal lobes also very important, because what they do is that they basically, imagine that I'm sitting, you're sitting also. We're sitting in our seats right now. We're sitting upright. We can like move forward, look at the screen, move back, whatever. All of that is happening because our parietal lobe is helping us understand that, okay, if I lean back, there's a cushion behind me, right? That sensation helps is coming because of the parietal lobe. Um, when we say somatosensory, again, the impression is that it's touch as well, right? Sensory, somatosensory, somato meaning bodily, and then sensory meaning touch over here in this context. So again, the way that you process the position of your body, is standing up straight, posture, whatever, all of that is coming from your parietal lobe. And then you have your occipital lobes, and these are responsible for visual perception, meaning that through your eyes, whatever information you receive, how you understand, for example, that you are looking at here, this very cute little owl. How do you know that this is like a little owl holding a little book? It's very cute. It has a little tassel. You know that this is an owl because data is going in from your eyes, going into your occipital lobe, through your occipital lobe, going into Broca's area and Wernicke's area, which are other brain areas responsible for language and communication. Together, those processes are acting on you for you to be able to recognize and label that as an owl. And then finally, you have the temporal lobes, which are responsible for your auditory sensation perception. Wow, I sound really bad. One second. Right. And so you have these four key parts of the brain that I just wanted to like very basically talk about. And if you look at this, let me just minimize you guys and look here. Um, Look at these like little basic things that are the sort of main functions of different parts of the brain. And remember that these are some of the oldest parts of the brain, meaning an evolutionary psychologist would say that these parts of the brain are primarily responsible for helping us survive millennia, right? And if you think about some of the functions of these parts of the brain, it'll make more sense. Now we have some questions. So go ahead. You have your hand raised. I can't see your name. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Miss, this is Laiba again. So, I would like to ask about temporal lobe, basically.
Yeah.
So, temporal lobe is also responsible for, I think, our sense of smell. Like, if I'm not mm, correctly, naming it, it's gustatory sense, right? So, it's responsible for our gustatory sense as well, like what we smell. Like, that's what I have like learned
Okay,
previous.
it's actually it's the sense of smell is your olfactory sense. So remember that. And yes, it is sensation, and so part of it does come from the temporal lobe. You're not wrong, but primarily it's coming from your uh, I can't remember, embarrassing, but I look it up and I'll get back to you. But please remember, it is the olfactory sense. The gustatory sense, I think, that you're referring to is your sense of taste. And Safa, thank you for answering these questions. Actually, Safa, do you remember which part of the brain is responsible for smell? What? Okay, there's a bunch of things happening in the chat. So if everybody could now look at the chat. And Laiba, I'm going to look up your question. I'm sorry that I can't remember the answer to it right away, but I'll check. Aisha, can you go for it?
Okay, Assalamualaikum, ma'am. So my question is basically that if we look at infants and young kids, so they do not have the power to plan or to reason, and they're even not able to balance themselves, their muscular movement. So I want to ask that at that point, are these particular parts of the brain not activated or aren't they developed? And furthermore, there are like my other question is very dumb because I don't have a biologist background, but my question is that like as we develop our skills and our reasoning abilities, so does our brain grow or does the parts that are inactivated activates by time with time?
Okay, I'm gonna have to ask you to repeat your first question because your voice broke a little bit. But for the second question, the brain absolutely grows in size. You're not wrong.
Okay.
It's not a stupid question at all. The brain
Okay,
physically
thanks.
grows in size because remember I was showing you those neural networks multiplying, right? That's your brain actually physically growing, right? When we talk about plasticity, and so far I've constantly been reiterating that all of this stuff, this mental life is like a physical part of you as well, right? Consciousness cannot actually be constructed without the physical organ of the brain. So it's not a stupid question at all. Thank you. And Shari.
My first question was
Oh yeah,
sorry.
sorry.
Yeah, no problem. My first question was that if you look at infants, so they do not have the ability to reason at till some particular age and balance their muscular movement. So I want to ask that during that time, are these frontal lobe and cerebellum, if they are not activated or they're not even developed?
Okay, another very good question. Um, the frontal lobe actually grows into its full form much later than infancy. Okay, it's present at infancy, but it has to continue developing. And one thing, and we'll talk about this when we do the human development aspect of this course, but your brain and the structures of your brain, actually are not fully formed, what the research shows us today, until you're 25 years old. Okay. And that might change again because, like, 20, 30 years ago, the theory was that your brain is completely and fully developed by the time you're 18, right? And then it became, about 10 odd years ago, they said, no, it's by the time you're 21 that all these structures of your brain are fully developed. And now we're talking about how it happens when you're 25, which is why we now refer to that period of 18 to 24 years of age as emerging adulthood rather than adulthood, because of the recognition that actually the brain is not fully developed right now. And so in response to your question, for a child to be able to over time acquire muscular coordination, which if you notice is incremental, right? Babies first start by rolling over, then they crawl, and then finally they walk. So it's a gradual incremental process, and that process mirrors the gradual incremental development of the physical structures of the brain, of which absolutely the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe are part of it. And the frontal lobe actually shows the most immense amount of growth from that initial age 0 to 3. Okay, so keep those things. Very good question. Thank you. All right, what else? Temporal lobe for olfactory senses. Thank you guys for answering my question. But Safa is saying it's frontal and parietal lobe for smell. So I need to double check. To my mind, parietal lobe makes more sense because it is somatosensory cortex is part of it. But again, I'll check and I will get back to you. Okay, hold your horses about lobotomies. We'll talk about it, but not today. The reason why some people are more intelligent than others, oh, that is such a huge question. Take my educational psychology class when you're a senior and I'll answer it for you. um, is a child has higher IQ, does that affect the development of the brain? If the brain develops early, every child's brain is going to develop from age 0 to 3. Okay, that development will only be a little disrupted if the child is born with some sort of developmental disability, right? And that also depends on the nature of the developmental disability. So I don't want to generalize this. Keep this part in mind. And second, IQ is something that is a social construct. Okay, IQ stands for intelligence quotient, but we don't actually know how we define intelligence, right? Um, Intelligence, if you want to measure it using an IQ test, those IQ tests have been tested on and validated as scales in populations that are English speaking, native English speaking. Um, their cultural context is completely different, and so you can't just use those to determine IQ. So it's, there's a lot more to it. And the relationship between environment and genetics is super important actually when we start talking about human intelligence. And when I think in this course we do have an entire lecture about intelligence, so you learn about that question a little bit better in that time. But for now, remember that it's important to ask yourself how you define intelligence. Are you just looking at an IQ test as a measure? Because that would not be very accurate, right? Intelligence or general intelligence is basically the reasoning, thinking, and remembering abilities that you possess that help you to function on a daily basis, right? And then there's a different theory that talks about your fluid intelligence and your crystallized intelligence, whereby your fluid intelligence is what you already have, which is present with you. And it basically refers to your reasoning abilities, whereas crystallized intelligence is all the stuff that you learn over your life. So anyway, just giving you a little bit of insight. And there are other ways also of defining intelligence. So I'm just giving you an example of how it's diverse. Okay, now we're going to talk about poor Phineas. This was really interesting because Phineas Gage, again, 1848, right? If you remember, our first psychology experiment was happening around this time, right? 10 years plus minus. So this is really like the very beginning of the field. And in this experiment, sorry, not in this experiment. I'm so sorry. I'm just a little stuffy headed. Okay. What happens in this incident is that there's this man, he's a railway worker, he's, really funny, he's really lovely to hang out with, the kind of person you want to be friends with, very warm and friendly and, good temperament, positive, da da da. And he has this accident, which is so traumatic, but weirdly he survives, even though basically a rod goes through his brain, right? But he survives this massive traumatic injury. And it's almost like, Jekyll and Hyde, because when when his injuries heal, he emerges as a completely different person who his friends and family described as no longer being who he was, right? So you kind of realize that with a brain injury, number one, there can be significant impacts on who you are, right? What that tells us is that our personality, some parts of it are absolutely here physically, present, right? It's not just about, it's not something that exists in this gray mist of, it's not something you can't point to. It's got something, let me phrase this better. I'm not saying it well. Right. Think about it like this. The fact that he completely changes as a person after this injury to the brain, it tells you that who you are has some sort of tangible physiological roots, number one. Okay? The second thing is that when you look at what those changes are, right? Now let's look at the quality of those changes. The first thing you say is that he's not really able to control his emotions that well anymore. So what you're seeing is there is something here, right, that has affected what? His? Do you know what it's affected?
Self-regulation.
It's affected his,
Hypothalamus. Hypothalamus.
yes, amygdala, actually. And so self-regulation has been affected, right? Because of damage to the amygdala. One tiny example. Second thing, his memory is affected, right? Again, why do you think that happened? Where did it come from? No, nothing.
Frontal lobe. I think.
Hippocampus. Hippocampus. Oh, his memories were unharmed. Sorry. Wow. His memories were unharmed, which means the hippocampus was not damaged, also, which means that you learned something. Right. So think about Phineas Gage, but also there's a question about lobotomies. It's a very good question. In the 1950s, 60s, 70s, it's a very popular way to fix people. And what they would do is that they would basically, if I'm not mistaken, in lobotomy, they would remove the brain stem or cut that connection between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Except that they didn't realize that by severing that connection, you're not actually inhibiting people or fixing people, you're actually destroying their capacity for the left brain and the right brain to communicate with each other, right? The left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Now, if I take you back here, here, right? You see the left hemisphere, you see the right hemisphere. Within this left and right hemisphere, now I'll take you here. You see Broca's area, motor speech area is here, right? Here, okay? And then sensory speech area, Wernicke, is here, right? One of these lies in the left hemisphere predominantly, and one of these lies in the right hemisphere predominantly. When communication between the two is cut, what happens is, remember I showed you this, and I said, look, here's an owl, okay? If you had had a lobotomy or became what was referred to as a split brain patient, what would happen is that you see this, you recognize that it is an owl, okay? But when I ask you what it is, you're not going to be able to say owl. Your word is going, your brain is going to throw out random words. Like you might look at this and say that's a book. Sorry, not a book. That's bad. There's already a book. You might look at this and say this is a phone, even though you know that it's an owl, right? So your sensory speech area is fine, but your motor speech area is not fine, because they can't communicate with each other. So the sensory speech area and the motor speech area have to also, remember, communicate with your visual perception. So the way that you make sense of the world and the way you communicate becomes completely damaged if you have a lobotomy. And so eventually they realized this, but they used to do lobotomies to treat, anything really, from homosexuality, which was a disease at that point, as the American Psychological Association looked at it, and thankfully it's not anymore. But we'll talk about that when we talk a little more about cultural influences on social sciences. Mohammed Ali, you have a question?
Yes, I saw the show once in which they showed a person was going under so much stress that they started just. I mean, he was a lawyer, he's in a courtroom. He started blabbering about random words like sandwich, turkey, random words. And it was just like the case we talked about in lobotomy. So my question was, okay, without severing that physiological connection between the different hemispheres, can this symptom, a split brain personality, also come from the stress or hormonal imbalance? We call it.
No, split brain is exactly what it means, right? It means there's a split in the communication of your brain, of your left and right hemisphere. Okay? Because of
Mhm.
damage to the corpus callosum or the cutting of that corpus callosum or the removal of that corpus callosum. Okay? But what you're talking about is a phenomenon called word salad. And it can happen in a time of extreme stress, but mostly word salad is used to describe the state of somebody who is mentally unwell with a um, schizoid disorder. Sorry, I lost the word. Um, yeah. So so that is a sign then of mental illness. Okay, word salad refers to basically those connections going on the fritz and just not working anymore, right? Imbalances of neurotransmitters, all the signals are getting jumbled. And so you're saying this stuff that makes no sense, but is so it can sometimes happen if a person is extremely stressed out or very traumatized. But for the most part, word salad is a symptom of a schizoid disorder. All right. ECT, does it physically, you mean electrotherapy? Okay. Remember that there are electrical signals and chemical signals that work together. Okay, your neurotransmitters are the chemical signals, but they don't get activated without the electric signals. Okay, so these electric signals in your brain are what these electrotherapy methods work on. Ooh, I Safa, do you mind if I read this message to them? I would love to hear this. Okay. So Safa has done research on Walter Jackson Freeman and lobotomy recently in her fifth semester, not super recently. And she has both of them saved. So if you would like to learn more, go ahead and talk to Safa. Right, Safa, I think it would be really cool if maybe next class you could do like a maybe 10-minute quick review of this just for interest sake. Would you be open to that? Great. Okay. All right. This question: if the amygdala gets damaged after an accident, are the changes permanent or not? This was actually somebody else had sent this question in as well. Okay, if there's damage to the brain, does that damage remain permanently, or is there a way to fix it, or can basically whatever has been damaged be reversed? Can the brain regrow? Right. Again, please hold on to this question because we do have it later on in the course. But in a nutshell, the answer to this question is that sometimes yes, right? And exactly what Kaval has said, that people can relearn motor functions. Let's say after having had a stroke, when you do physiotherapy, what that does is it's a way of retraining your brain to recognize those motor movements. Okay? But at the same time, assume someone like Phineas Gage, that cannot get fixed, right? So you can maybe teach someone how to cope with it in some cases, which again alters, or is introducing new learning to the brain. However, you cannot ever completely reverse it, right? Even if somebody's had a stroke and it's been a severe stroke, there is a limit to how much the brain will now be able to learn how to move the way it used to. Because again, obviously, in the case of a stroke patient, it depends also on the nerve damage. Recovery and relearning is slower for older patients because even though the brain maintains its plasticity, but if you are an older person who has not made the effort to maintain optimal plasticity throughout your lifetime, then it will be harder. Okay, so remember, this is the part where you start thinking now about the environment in relation to your biology. Okay, and now should we start this? Are you ready for this? Um, okay. If the same accident happened before he was 25, okay, so Jyoti has one question. I'm going to answer it and then I'm going to get to this. The question was, if the same accident happened to Phineas, I'm assuming that's who you're talking about. If the same accident had happened to Phineas before he turned 25, does that mean that his brain will regrow or develop? So if you are younger and you experience some sort of brain injury, because at that point your brain is still developing, the chances are higher and better for recovery. But again, there are no guarantees because it depends also on what part of your brain or what parts of your brain have suffered, and B, also it depends on um, how intensely the damage has, or how intense rather the damage is, right? Not everything can be reversed. Again, I will ask you to remember that not everything can be reversed, and not everything can be reversed fully, perhaps also, right? So remember that. And now I'm going to stop answering these questions and I'm going to teach you what I wanted to teach you today. I love that you guys ask questions, and I want to point out to you again that just because I don't answer each and every one of your questions, it doesn't mean I'm not reading them or appreciating them. And I think the thing I love the most about teaching you guys, which I find very different from my previous class last semester, is that so many of you are answering each other's questions. It's like a proper conversation that you're having, and I love it. So good job there. Okay. Now we talk about behavior genetics, which I think you guys are very interested in. And I want to also let you know, somebody else in this class said, oh, I don't have a biology background. If you hadn't guessed by now, I also don't have a biology background. So please, if you're a biology student and you want to know more, read a book. I'm sure you can understand it. I have to be completely honest with you. My specialization is human development. Um, and I don't look at behavior genetics in my work or my research at all. And so I'm giving you a heads up that I may not be able to answer all of your questions on the spot, in which case I'll come back to you with your answers next class, okay? But in a nutshell, behavior genetics, like we've talked about before, it's trying to answer the question of how much of what we do is sort of almost biologically predetermined, right? How much of what we do, think, feel, or our intelligence actually also, how much of that is just given to us when we're born, and there's, of course, the environment acts on those pieces of us that are hardwired into us, but there's a limit to what the environment can do. And so, to what extent, essentially, behavior geneticists try to figure out that to what extent is our sort of destiny predetermined, okay, by our biology. And within biology itself, what they refer to is your genetic code or your genetic information, which is contained within your genome. And your genome itself is related to DNA molecules. And those DNA molecules are, I mean, there's a lot of talk, if you've ever watched any sort of crime show, you'll know that DNA is so unique. Like each of us has a completely unique helix, right? That's what the shape is called. And within that, what that implies is that each of us has completely unique genetic information, which is correct. Okay. Now, the second thing that's important is that where does this genetic information come into us from? It comes into us from our chromosomes. If you remember basic biology, mujhe bhi pata hai basic biology, when an egg is fertilized, so chromosomes through the fetus develops, right? And you get X chromosomes and Y chromosomes, male and female chromosomes together. And if you have XX, which I think is male, you have a male child. And so chromosomes basically determine what the baby becomes. A double helix, yes, thank you. XX is female. Okay, sorry, bye. I told you I'm not a biology person, but I'm trying. So point is that all of your genetic information is contained within your DNA. Your DNA is something that's absolutely unique to you. But that doesn't mean that just because your genetic information is unique to you does not mean that there aren't parts of it that are shared across human beings. That's why we have something that's called the human genome, right? And think of that human genome as that superstructure that we use to understand individual differences between groups of people as well as within groups of people. And the thing about genes is that they don't always express themselves. And the expression of genes, and this is something that we've finally been able to learn, is that the expression of genes, that is where the environmental influence comes in. Because your genes, and I think we've discussed briefly before, but if you, for instance, have a genetic predisposition to depression, you may never actually develop depression, because maybe the environment that you're surrounded in is very positive, it's very supportive, and you never experience those kinds of traumas in your life, or anything that triggers the activation of the gene. So that's, again, I'm just telling you to think about the environment in relation to how it acts rather on the human genome, or particular genes being expressed or not expressed. The protein piece of this is also important because that is related to our physical body, right? And it's basically giving what the gene does is that it has instructions that it then carries out. That's what gene expression looks like. And protein molecules are what activate the instructions to take place, right? So like I was saying, we study behavior genetics because we want to understand what difference looks like, what is a significant difference. Even the smallest difference can be a significant difference. So look at this. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've taught this before, but I am always floored when I see this statistic of that our human and chimpanzee profiles only vary by 0.6%, right? And so if you think about it, there's only a 0.6% difference in our basic genetic information and that of a chimpanzee that makes all the difference, that allows us to sit here, give presentations, teach, learn, do research, grow, work, make money, have families, do all of this, communicate in multiple languages, be bilingual, make music, produce art, all of that is coming from a 0.6% difference. What do you think of that? Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Mohammed Ali, what do you have to say?
जो अभी आपने बात की कि like it's 0.6% difference that makes literally all of the difference between humans and chimpanzees. So I mean, इसी के साथ साथ like for example, there's sometimes there's something known as Down syndrome, where a person that normally a person human being has 46 chromosomes, So there is an addition of an extra chromosome, the 47th chromosome. So that results in a very big variation in the phenotype and the genotype of a human being. And so that inhibits some of their capacities, but also makes them different. So I mean, it's just a very small difference, an extra chromosome, but it can lead to a very big change. So I mean, I say what I get from this is that genes, although I think they have just the smallest bit of difference in a gene can make a very big difference as human being develops. So I think they're extremely crucial in deciding our psychology. I mean, I don't want to make bold statements, but I think they're really, really important.
Yeah, it's not a bold statement, it's an intelligent statement, actually, because yes, it makes a massive, massive difference. And it's really interesting how we have this common human genome. However, if you think about it, right, for example, uh, just a small sort of thing, from my non-biology perspective, is that a lot of times you will express or do things that people will tell you that, oh, this is, you do this or you say this or you talk just like your mother or your father, whereas your next door neighbor will not talk like your mother or father, right? And so even that is just a tiny, it's how do I put this, it's like a little, it's evidence of, I feel, just coincidence, or I don't know what it is. It's just very fascinating to me how even two people, siblings growing up in the same house, and we're going to talk about twin studies also, with with the same sort of genetic information, two twins, fraternal twins actually, identical twins, sorry, what's it called, monozygotic twins, even they can have completely different temperaments, completely different personalities, and completely different pieces of who they are, even though they've had the exact same experiences, even though their genetic information is absolutely so similar, that they can still be so different, but at the same time be the same in so many interesting ways. And there's this really cool twin study that we're going to talk about, where these I'll wait till we talk about it, but it's about two brothers. It's actually like a movie. It's about two twin brothers, identical twins, separated to the point where one was on a different continent, right? One was in Europe or the UK and the other one was in the US. They didn't even know the other existed until they were in their 40s. But they spoke in the exact same way. Their sort of voice, their way of speaking, their personalities, everything was very, very similar, even though they had had completely different environments, right? And that really lends a lot of credence to the assumption that studying the variations in genes, as well as understanding the many ways in which our genetic makeup affects our life trajectory and our life outcomes, is very important. And so, if you think about this, where um, you know we, like I said, we're similar but also we're different. And so we, for instance, using genetics, just basic genetics, right, not behavior genetics, but genetics, can also tell us what are the genes that are related to how tall you can become, right? But then how tall you actually grow, how much of your height is completely inherited, we can't know that, right? So we know that there's a genetic influence on your height. We just don't know how much of a genetic influence there is, simply because of something called small gene effects. Okay, these are literally small, and also, sorry, so many that it's hard for scientists to reduce it down to this and this is responsible for height. Okay, so that's, I think, one of the limitations of genetic studies. And so, it's good for us to keep questioning the value of these without saying that they're not valuable, right? Sorry, questioning the findings of these without saying that they're not important. So even this slide is really random. This cartoon where basically all these people are, thinking about or talking, I think, about their sleep, and how one person is talking about he likes water, the other one says I have to drink coffee. And these are basically these really random, strange ways in which we're all really different. And then occasionally we encounter other people who are very similar in our tastes and preferences, and in personalities and ways of thinking. And absolutely a lot of it has to do with environment. But I don't know, have you ever met someone who's come from a completely different environment as you, however, tends to see the world in a similar way, respond to things in a similar way? No, maybe because you're very young.
I think, my friend, this my friend back home. So he and I mean, obviously before like 3 years ago, we didn't even hang out that much. But after, hanging out and talking to each other, we found out that, there are so many startling similarities between the dynamics of our life. So sometimes it's strange, but other times like we haven't had similar lives before that, but we do think of the world and those things are coffee similarly. I don't know why, but we don't even have a genetic similarity, but we do have this similar psyche.
But do you actually have a genetic similarity, right? Think about it this way. The human genome, it implies that there are certain things common to all of us. There's certain genetic information that all of us have, and that is the genetic information, right, that makes us humans, right? In the same way as, let's say, the genetic information of a chimpanzee is what makes a chimpanzee a chimpanzee. Does that make sense so far? But at the same time, you have to remember that you can't narrow it down to just, it's not like, one gene is different in you and different in your friend, and that's why there is some difference, right? There could be more small gene differences. And again, it's about how the environment acts on those genes, which may mean that, those genes are expressed differently as well. And so, yes, Ifra, you're right that the environment makes a big difference. It does have a role to play. And the cultural environment also matters. But what about people who grow up in completely different cultural environments, and yet are similar in some ways, right? um, so that's sort of what it is. But behavior genetics, I'm going to come back to the psychology part of it now, right? So when we talk about behavior genetics, think about things like temperament, which is how reactive you are, the extent to which you react to stimuli in your environment. Even your capacity for self-regulation is genetic. However, that being said, you start to learn self-regulation as you also grow older. So there's a genetic component to it, but also environmental component to it. Lookalikes, I think we will not consider in our conversation, Tayyaba, because those are just like physical similarities for doppelgangers. We are concerned more with twin studies, where again there's evidence of an actual relationship, which is not a coincidental relationship, which a lookalike would be a coincidental relationship, right? Um, but you do raise one important point, again, not related to our psychological lens, but I'll just give you this. Um, People from particular groups tend to look similar, right? Um, Communities tend to look similar. That genetic information has become similar. A lot of it is due to members of a community obviously marrying each other replicates that, and that's the similarity in appearance. And I'm just saying that so because I don't know if that's what you were talking about, if you were talking about doppelgangers. Okay, is 9:45. So we're gonna pause now. I can also find myself getting a bit tired. And I'm sorry, I know I haven't been optimal at all today, but inshallah, I'll see you on Monday. And I will be feeling better. My brain will be working at optimal capacity, and left brain, right brain will be communicating. So, yeah. And yes, Ifra, very good point. Height or weight might be different in twins. If they're dizygotic twins, absolutely they will be different, and that's because the chromosome development is different. Tayyiba, you have a question?
Miss, can you really say for certain if something is genetic or if something has been learned? For example, you said you speak just like your mother.
Yeah,
There-
yeah,
There's a very thin line between both of them, right?
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. And that's the thing, right? If, for instance, you do certain, okay, I there's a particular face I make when I'm a little, worried, concerned, confused, whatever. I always do this, okay? And what I have been told is that apparently this is exactly what my father also used to do when he was upset. And I never noticed it in him when he was alive, but it's nice to know that I somehow behave the exact same way as him without him teaching. He didn't sit and say, hey, this is how you frown, right? It's just something I have done automatically. And that's just sort of a way of saying that I don't know if I um, how do you say, like unconsciously picked up this expression from him, right? So learned it and imitated it. I don't know if it was hardwired into me, but what I do know is where it came from. Do you follow what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Yes.
So that would be my answer, that it's just, I don't think that behavior genetics is evolved enough right now. It's so early in its stages of growth that it's too early for us to say Kiji, absolutely this is the correct answer, right? And so that's what I would say. And please do remind me if I forget. There's a really, really super article on this in the New York Times. It was published a couple of years ago, and it captures the debate in behavior genetics really well. So please do remind me if I forget to share it. I'll post it on the LMS. Another thing is that please, so so for CP, I want you guys to email me still and copy Safa to your CP if you are in Safa's section. Sorry, what am I saying? Scratch. Email Safa and copy me. Safa will answer your questions. Sometimes I'll jump in as well. And I generally like to know what students are thinking and what kind of questions they're asking. So I really want you to continue emailing the CP to me as well. But please do send it to Safa and copy me. Safa will be marking your CP. For students who do not yet have a TA, please continue to send me your CP directly. And hopefully by tomorrow, we should have somebody for your section as well. So is that clear? You continue to email me if you don't yet have a TA. If you're in Safa section, then email Safa and copy me to the email. Okay? Okay, thank you. Oh, of course, I'm going to take classes. I have a cold. It's not as bad as it sounds, but my brain is not working well today. I'm so sorry about all this confusion. Thank you guys. Take care. I'll post the recording. I think I started it a little bit later, so first few minutes have been left out. But I'll post it today. And okay, this question, Mohammed Ali, you email it to me, okay? It looks like a good question. So everybody leave now. I have one student who should wait because I have to talk to them. They know who they are. Thank you, guys. Thank you. You're so sweet. Bye-bye.